Hola, how wonderful it is to be with you all. I'm speaking to you from Belfast in Northern Ireland, speaking to you all the way across the world in Colombia, and it's a real privilege and honor to be able to speak with you this evening. I'm joined by my colleague and friend, a local dance maker and dance artist from Northern Ireland, Michael McAvoy. And you're going to see Michael in person, I believe, in the middle of March. Michael's coming out to deliver a workshop and to speak at your closing event. And I'm so thrilled that we have the opportunity to introduce him to you via this online masterclass this evening. And I'll bring Michael in on a couple of occasions, maybe just to illustrate some of the points that I'm making, but through his own practice, through the lens of his own experience. The topics for discussion this evening are quite wide-ranging. They go from developing your practice to building a team, through to presenting and pole dance, and outreach and education. Later on in the session, in the second half, there'll be a chance for us to have a much wider conversation. Now, I'm just going to pause here because a little box has come up on my computer saying confirm your speaking language. So I'm just going to hit the English button on that and save that. So, okay, I'm just going to resume now. Now, some of the topics that I'm going to discuss are more theoretical. Some of them are quite practical, and we might also touch on one or two philosophical points as well. And just before we start, just some basic ground rules. So this session is going to last about 2 hours. And after the first hour, I'm going to suggest we take a short break, maybe 5 minutes, a little comfort break. Particularly for Michael and myself here, because it is now 11:10 in the evening, but also for the two translators, Sebastian and William, to give them a bit of a break as well. So there will be a 5-minute break in about an hour's time. If you have any urgent questions after each particular section, which are represented on the slides in front of you, I'm very happy to deal with those. Use the raise your hand button at the bottom of your screen to indicate you'd like to ask a question, and I'll certainly do my very best to answer it. But if I could ask you all just to keep the questions quite short, because there's an awful lot to get through this evening. And indeed, for the 15 participants in the actual boot camp, if you want to leave any questions or thoughts that you have to the second half of our masterclass, to that wider discussion I mentioned, please do so. So anyway, I hope all that's clear. And if it is, I'm going to start. You're going to see me reading some notes here. And I hope you all enjoy the session very much. Okay. I'm going to start with some basic starting points. So this is the next slide. There we are, basic starting points. I'm going to start with developing your practice. So much of what we think of as success in this profession is directly derived from developing your technical skills and artistic voice to enable you to navigate and shape the changing landscape and contexts for dance performance. Across contemporary cultural forms, dance artists contribute to a wide range of collaborative and interdisciplinary processes, using different media and modes of audience engagement. To support this, they need to develop and value their artistic agency and professional confidence in negotiating their careers. So here are some thoughts on how you might do this. Look for opportunities to participate in workshops, intensive courses, shadowing opportunities, and research designed to develop areas of your practice. These developmental opportunities are a chance to take risks, but ones that you should feel confident are still realistic to achieve. Think about attending regular dance classes where possible, and or work with other like-minded folk to perhaps set up a series of classes with different leaders from the profession, sharing their skills and build up a reflective personal portfolio of performance experiences in order to investigate, apply, and evaluate the various skills, networks, and frameworks that will optimize your profession and give you the foundations whether that be community-based, working with young people, or working around certain themes like the climate crisis and environmental concerns. Be open to new ideas and actively seek out new perspectives and thinking around the subjects and contexts that interest you. Aesthetically, the dance world has been quick to understand and embrace interdisciplinary practice. So do think about how other art forms can inform your own practice as a dance maker and performer. And we'll touch on that again later in this masterclass. I know some of the other speakers you've already heard have talked about some of the subjects, or maybe touched on some of the subjects that I'm going to speak to this evening. And certainly I'm expecting that one of those will be how to maintain a healthy body. And it really is key to stay fit and to eat healthily and try and develop a strong core and stable lower body. I sound like my mother here, eat healthily and, try to develop a good physical sensibility. But these are all extremely important measures that you can take to improve and develop your practice. Now, I'm just going to pause for a moment because I think this might be an opportune moment to bring Michael in on this first occasion, just to maybe in a couple of minutes, Michael, reflect on what I've said about developing your practice. And I'm wondering, is there anything I've spoken about, has particularly resonates with you? Or is there anything you'd like to add as a practicing dance maker and performer?
Yes, hello. First of all, I think what hits home the most is what Richard's talking about, very generously about um, looking for opportunities. And it ties into something that I was taught back at professional college, which was a good practitioner or a good choreographer is like a good chef. They have a baseline of skills, um, the confidence to experiment, and a great obedience to problem solve. And so it's that kind of trio of both keeping up your skills, keeping up your working body as a dancer, and knowing your craft, being confident in what your artistic voice is enough that you can experiment with your own ideas. Um, and be ready to be your own producer when the time comes to problem solve everything that comes out of that time. Um, yeah, and just you never know what's going to come out of any opportunity. So any master class that you get, any residency opportunity that you can go for and apply to, especially the application side of things, it takes a few a few times to get that going as well. So a good basic starting point for me is to get quite good at writing all those applications, and you only get good at them by practice, by doing. So
Thank you, Michael. And indeed, we're going to talk about that very subject later on. There'll be a little exercise if we have time in writing about your work. So thank you for that really helpful intervention. I want to move on to the next point, which is called building, no, sorry, the previous page, previous slide. Yeah, building a successful team, leadership and collaboration. So the question here that is often asked is, what makes a good and successful team? Whether for a production or a project, two words coming to mind that are interconnecting in the arts: leadership and collaboration. So we're going to talk about these two characteristics just for a few minutes. Leadership. The primary responsibility of a leader is to have a strategic vision of what their department, unit, company, creative team will become, and to communicate that at every level and every opportunity. This is not about completing an annual plan with a list of things to do and timelines. It's really more of an in-depth, artful, dynamic, and yes, collaborative practice. And this links to another subject, which we talk about a huge amount in the arts: vision. So what is vision? Well, vision is called all sorts of things, such as having a North Star, futurist thinking, strategic seeing, and sensing. It's all about knowing where you are taking the team, whether they be a group of dancers in the studio or your staff colleagues. You understand the current state of things, yet you hold the future vision in your mind and in your heart at the same time. You see beyond the borders of your team and company and see how it plays with and influences the broader system and the public discourse and interaction with your work. In preparing for a production and in the rehearsal studio, this is closely aligned to creating and agreeing a theme for your work, an idea and storyline that will inspire and engage with your fellow creatives and appeal to audiences. So the point I'm making here is the interaction, the connectedness between leadership, vision, and collaboration, and how important they are together in forming and creating work for your publics. A leader's primary responsibility is vision, nurturing the ability to sense, share, collaborate on, and strategize a vision of how things will be. Historically, vision has come from the top down, but with the move to democratizing the arts, the propensity of improvisation and devised working methodologies, as well as ongoing technical innovations, leadership can come from the communities we serve, participants in arts events, as well as dancers themselves. So once it was top down, now it is bottom up, meeting the top down, as it were. Closely connected to good leadership and vision is, as I say, collaboration. This is a key way to help your performance group develop and stay motivated by building a meaningful connection with them based on trust, understanding, and valuing their own individual creativity. Aesthetically, collaboration between artists in different disciplines can produce the most innovative and exciting of works. In recent years, dance has been particularly adept in embracing other art forms in the creative process and performance outcomes. And we regularly see dance makers working with film, other visual arts practices, sound and audio design, theatre and literature to create interdisciplinary works. This is an approach that many audiences and programmers, particularly in the UK, Ireland and Europe, very much support and is perhaps worth considering as you think about how you might evolve and develop your own individual practice. Okay, I'm going to move on here and talk a bit about creating a repertoire. And I will come back to this other bullet point about a unique selling point and proposition in a few minutes. So creating a repertoire. Why create a repertoire or body of work? First, there is a philosophical reason. Of all the performing arts, professional dance is without doubt the most ephemeral. Dance leaves few tangible traces that continue to be broadly accessible, like, for instance, music recordings. Unlike theatre, music, or opera, it is also often lacks an authoritative source text, a written account of the choreography that solidifies the movements of a dance piece into signs akin to letters, and thus invites a rereading or reenactment. So, the restaging of older works not only keeps them fresh and alive, but also helps put into context the creation of new pieces. In that sense, the function of repertoire and the creation of new work amplify each other. As with any artistic oeuvre, every new work builds on a past that is considered known. Whilst it is important to advance the art form and to continue to push the boundaries of where dance sits within the wider artistic industry through the creation of new works, it is equally important to look backwards to dance history and to keep legacies alive. But there are also practical reasons too.
Please, ya mismo también me pongo a subir. ¿Y las fotos de esta yo te las mandé? No. Luego contemporáneo.
Okay, I'm just pausing because I heard some questions or some commentary there. Are you happy for me to continue, Lena?
There were not questions, Richard.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm going to continue just to sort of complete this section on repertoire. Because I was saying there are also some practical reasons too for creating a repertoire. Creating a repertoire of productions that vary in subject matter, aesthetic format, in scale, by which I mean small works such as solo pieces and works with 2 or 3 dancers against larger group pieces, and therefore a repertoire that also has different financial implications, different costs of works, and offers the ability to better meet the needs of promoters and venues that you may wish to work with. Often, for example, it is better to enter a new marketplace with a smaller, more cost-effective work, and then build on that in future visits with larger works. So taken together, the philosophical and the practical provide a good basis for helping to more widely communicate to audiences, artists, communities, promoters, partners, and funders the values, mission, and interests of your company or group through a repertoire. In this way, those who you might like to work with will better understand both the potential for overlapping interests and therefore opportunities to partner or collaborate with you. Okay. The last bullet point on this slide is some thoughts on governance. Now, I've deliberately called it just thoughts on governance, because although I am hardly qualified to comment on the appropriate legal and financial structures for arts and cultural organizations in Colombia, I thought it still might be helpful at this point to look at the factors that might help guide you to choose which structure is best suited to your own circumstances, and also the general roles and responsibilities of governing or management boards or committees. So moving from an informal to a more formal structure has several advantages as I see it. And this is because a formal structure can articulate the values and objectives of your organization in a better way. A formal structure can provide rules for decision-making and internal management. It can facilitate transactions between the organization and others. And it can provide continuity when the founder members of the group step back or retire or leave. And finally, depending on the structure chosen, it might provide the members of that organization with limited liability. For many artists and organizations working in the UK, Europe, and North America, a fundamental question in establishing an arts organization is whether it is to be constituted as a non-profit organization. The phrase, which you may already be familiar with, and indeed, and I don't know this, forgive me, but it may be something that is already practiced, is common in Colombia. The phrase non-profit simply means that any profit made will be reinvested in the organization itself rather than paid out to the members. In general, it will be necessary for an arts body that intends to be regularly funded wholly or in part by grant aid from the public purse or voluntary donations to be constituted as non-profit. This is because an organization that pays dividends to its promoters is unlikely to secure funding support. So the point I'm making here is to ask yourself the question whether it is better to be in a non-profit making structure or a profit making structure. Because of course, none of this diminishes the profit motive of many good commercial arts enterprises. That's absolutely fine. But it is important to note and to be clear about the question of whether to be non-profit or not, because it goes to the root of the nature of your organization, which in itself will determine this legal structure. Ask yourself, what structure do I need to best secure the financial resources I need, and what are the operational and other consequences of this? In the UK and Ireland, this means that most of us, including my own festival, are constituted as registered charities, which enables us to seek support from national government agencies, trusts and foundations, and public donations. In addition, there are other legal frameworks that provide benefits and indeed protection to the members of an arts organization, and whatever you do, Always seek legal advice before taking any financial decisions. I want to just end these thoughts on governance very quickly to briefly review the general roles and responsibilities of governing or management boards or committees. A governing board's primary responsibility on behalf of its stakeholders, by which I mean not just the funding agencies, but also the wider community of artists and audiences that the organization serves. The governing body's primary responsibility is to ensure that the organization that it is responsible for remains viable and thrives. Legal and non-profit structures require members of governing bodies to have distinct financial and fiduciary responsibilities, which I'm not going to go into detail here, because as I say, I'm not aware of the legal structures that are common in Colombia. But what I will say is that whilst these are clearly important operating principles, we at Belfast International Arts Festival also acknowledge other equally important principles that guide what we call the recruitment or the creation of a balanced governing board. They include diversity. And by diversity, I mean diversity of age, gender, experience, geographic location, ethnicity, traditions, etc. And it's important that members of the governing body align with and are actively supportive of the remit and values of our organization, and take a keen interest in our activities. So there are the legal requirements of good financial management and other fiduciary duties, but there's also for us this other set of characteristics that our board should be representative of the people we serve. And diversity is very important in that, and being aligning with our values. And in this way, members of a governing board, including my own, are de facto the guardians of the spirit of the organization. Okay. All right, can we move on to the next slide, please? And I will be coming back to that USP thing, which was in the previous slide during this part of the presentation. And this is called presenting and touring dance. So we're going to get a little bit more into actually how we go about presenting and touring dance productions, whether they be to community venues or to professional venues, or whether they be site-specific. I'm going to largely talk about the domestic market touring, but I will touch on internationalization and international elements in some parts of this presentation, because I'm very aware that I think the final session with Emma is going to look at internationalization in much more detail. Okay, so the first point I want to make here is I'm going to look at the factors you need to consider to ensure a successful tour, whether at home or indeed abroad. And the first point is be clear about why you want to present your work on tour. Before you embark on your journey, you should ensure that you are clear about why you want to present work on tour, as this will determine how you set about doing this. It is doubly important when considering international touring, as this will often have major financial and practical implications. Touring doesn't have to be, nor is it right for every artist or company. You may be quite comfortable in working solely with your own local community, or perhaps you have an important relationship with one particular venue or building. In any event, you should ensure you understand the value you will gain from touring a region, your own country, or indeed abroad, all of which represent different marketplaces with different opportunities and indeed risks. Potential reasons for touring include supporting the increase of income generation, or reaching audiences who the content or aesthetics of the work may better speak to, or a combination of all of the above or other reasons. Whatever it is, be sure and be confident for your reasons, as you can use these to help measure progress or not in putting together a tour. In summary, therefore, think about why you want to tour a specific piece of work. Who is your target audience? Be honest with yourself and the creative team around you for the reasons for touring, the viability of doing so, and whether you think that there is an audience for the type of work you are producing. And moving on to the second bullet point, understand and research potential marketplaces. If presenting your work on tour is a new departure for you, then do also consider looking out for training programs and resources that may be on offer from various organizations, such as the British Council. It is really important that you understand the nature of each place you are considering visiting on tour, its culture, politics, history, and of course, relationship with the performing arts and dance in particular. Understanding the nature of each marketplace is a vital component in planning a successful tour and will help you better understand if the work you have to offer will be of or can be of interest to local audiences. Ask yourself, has this region ever had dance before? And if so, what has been the audience reaction? Maybe you can speak to other artists who have toured to this region before to get their thoughts on their experience. It is also important to try and understand how venues and organizations, arts organizations work in that region and the challenges and issues they face. Such an informed and considered approach is much more likely to result in meaningful conversations with promoters and venues in that region. Research the venue or the festival or the booking organization, promoter online, and then find the venues and organizations in that region who program work that is similar to yours. And when talking to these promoters, don't be afraid to compare your work to others and show knowledge of their program. So don't be shy in using reference points that they may be familiar with in describing your work. And that really is a segue into the next section, which I call selling your production. So there are a number of points I want to make here about how to sell your production and some thoughts for you on a sales campaign, if you wish. And a lot of this derives from my own experience in producing dance and touring dance in a life before I became a festival director. And one of the most important things I felt was to invite promoters to see your work at home. There's nothing like seeing the work firsthand on stage or in the rehearsal studio, if that's appropriate. Invite programmers from that you're interested in to come and see your work at first hand. Think about creating both a full-length video plus a short trailer of the work and a short video explanation of what the work is about and who it is for. consider connecting with regional, national, and international networks of presenters and venues. And I will come back to international networks later in the masterclass. Look at the opportunity, the possibilities of showcasing your work for a network, whether at home or abroad. We in Ireland have a few networks, particularly in the Republic of Ireland in the south, and there are often occasions where we can present work, performing artists can present work as works in progress to those networks, which will help them better understand the piece and whether they want to book it on tour. Also consider creating promotional materials for presenters to include a project description, financial considerations, and include some visuals as well. And have an understanding of the needs of the production, the size, the scale, the numbers on tour, the specific technical needs, etc. When touring a production, you are particularly reliant on the expertise and indeed goodwill of the promoter's own technical staff. And you would be doing yourselves a very big favor by ensuring that you provide a clear and accurate technical specification well in advance of your performance. I'm very fortunate to have one of the best technical directors, I believe, in the UK and Ireland. And he has given me some tips to pass on to you this evening for writing up a technical spec. Just a few simple tips, and this is his words. Be knowledgeable and accurate, particularly with what you need the promoter venue to provide. Specify your realistic requirements. For example, regarding flooring, what kind of floor do you need? What sort of dimensions on the stage do you need? And other important characteristics, important functions like the venue and stage heating and temperature, the number and type of dressing rooms. Be very clear and specify these accurately. Also be realistic about the number of technical staff you require and their purpose. Define their roles and duties and provide a schedule for the get-in, fit-up, and performance sessions. And only ask for additional staff and facilities if necessary, as this could be very expensive for the promoter. Distinguish between essential and non-essential requirements. And remember, this is a collaboration. So work in partnership with the promoter or venue and his or her staff. So that's my technical director's recommendations. And it's, those are the sort of things we try to practice in our festival, in our event, when working with incoming companies. A few other points that I want to just cover very quickly here in selling your production. Of course, do a working touring budget and also a pre-tour budget. Know the costs of touring to help you to decide how much you are asking the programmers to pay for your work. So a carefully designed budget is very important. And I may come back to that if I have time later on. And finally, in selling a production, I'm going to talk about personalizing your communications and learning from the replies. So contact each programmer by name, excuse me, and send individual correspondence, not an automated Dear Programmer. Write Dear Richard in my case, personalize this. Add a phone number on your email signature strip so that we know that where to contact you, and let us know if you're available for a conversation. And in turn, listen carefully and understand the responses that you receive back, and be open about any additions or amendments you may be able to make to the program that you've been in discussion with the promoter about. And if you receive a no from a promoter, use this as a reason to move on and to find other venues who are a better match. Be friendly and interested, and remember that even if venues don't book you for this particular tour, you're still developing a relationship, you're still engaging in a conversation, and they might take you in the future. Now, I've already put one document into the chat room, and what I've put in there is a technical spec that we got for a production from Australia, a dance production called Between Tiny Cities. And that's just there. I'm not going to go through that. It's just there in the chat room as a PDF for you to look at as an example of good practice in putting together a technical schedule. I will come back to Between Tiny Cities later on as well, but it's a great example of a touring work. Okay, I mentioned USPs earlier on, unique selling proposition. And this is really about how to stand out from the crowd, developing your USP. And my advice is to write down the unique selling points of your production to get you thinking why audiences and venue programmers would be interested in your work. Back this up with reviews, quotes, recommendations, images, and information. But remember to be brief. And the importance of being brief is because a lot of these programmers get so much information across their desks. They don't often read everything. So being brief and to the point is extremely important. I talked about budgets earlier on in terms of touring dance, just mentioned it. But really what's behind the budget question is ensuring that your touring program is financially feasible, that actually it stacks up financially. Because mounting any tour is expensive, as in addition to artist fees and production and rehearsal costs, you also have travel, transportation, accommodation, and per diems to take into account. And with international touring, these costs can increase significantly due to international travel, freight, and visas. So it's really important to understand what the cost basis is. As with many projects, you may well need to look at a plural funding structure to put together a viable budget. Now, what do I mean by plural funding structure? On the income side, you might have fees or box office. You might be able to get some grants, and you might be able to get some sponsorship or donations. That's a sort of plural funding model I'm referring to. One consideration to throw into the mix is whether you can access any funds from the regions you will be visiting. For example, is one of the regions you want to tour in supportive of incoming dance production? And if so, might they be able to offer financial assistance? So local authorities and councils and local government structures in the region you're going to might be able to assist in addition to any income you get from the venue. Now, you may need to go through the local venue or organization you're working with to determine that, to access those monies. That will need a particular conversation and coordination with the venue, but it could mean that you access monies that you might not otherwise have been able to do so before. So rather than going through a sample budget line by line, I'm going to pop into the chat room now an example of a touring of a dance production budget that Creative Scotland, which is the Arts Council of Scotland, Creative Scotland use. So give me a moment while I just put that into the chat room. There we go. Okay. Right. Moving on very quickly, just to finish this section on financial feasibility, is one other financial consideration when touring internationally, is whether or not additional taxation on your costs and or fee is required. Now, I'm sure my colleague who's speaking to you in a few days' time will cover this, but I've decided to touch on it because it is such an important issue, and many artists really don't take this into account and suddenly find there's a tax bill at the end of this, and they've suddenly lost money on when they're touring abroad. You should check with the presenting organization you're working with or the promoter about whether they will withhold tax from your fee. This is certainly the case with many European countries, including the UK, where in some cases up to 20% of your fee can be deducted as withholding tax. However, with good advanced planning, there are often ways to agree a total or partial exemption on such taxes. Why am I raising this? Is because I don't want any of you who decide to tour to suddenly face a tax bill. The worst case in the world is giving money back, having it deducted for all sorts of reasons that we didn't understand at the outset. So please remember the taxation question. It is really, really important. And that really applies, as I say, to international touring. I'm sure Emma will pick up with that in a couple of days' time. I'm going to move on to contracts in this section on presenting and touring dance. And then I'll move quickly into risk assessments, and I'm going to touch on sustainable and green touring. So the contract is a natural progression from your negotiations with a promoter, and follow-up written agreement is a very important aspect of putting that negotiation to bed. The contract should be clear and concise, should be a clear and concise document that lays out the agreement between you. It should also cover certain unexpected eventualities, including cancellation or postponement of performances. So wherever possible, yes, try and use your own contract. But standard contracts from promoters and festivals tend to be broad in nature, covering a whole range of activities. And if you do use their contracts, don't be afraid to add detail and delete anything that's irrelevant to your project. Never feel pressurized to accept contract clauses. Keep negotiating and offering positive and constructive alternatives until both parties are happy. Repeat essential technical and other elements and requirements in the contract that might appear elsewhere, in your technical rider. So it's often useful to repeat in the contract your flooring requirements, your dressing room requirements, and certainly your travel and transportation. Now, I'm going to drop another document into the chat room, which is a sample contract that the Theatre Forum in Dublin, a representative organisation of theatre and dance companies, use as a template for venues to engage theatre and dance companies. So give me a moment, I'm going to drop this one in. There we go. Okay. I'm going to talk very briefly about risk assessments. It's a very dull subject in many ways, but actually it is very important as well. And what do I mean by risk management? Well, risk management refers to the process of making decisions that will help to avoid and reduce the impact of unexpected and undesired outcomes. So practitioners need to be fully aware of what can go wrong and know how to implement strategies as preventative measures. Much of health and safety regulations and laws around the world now require risk assessments to be done in a variety of manners in a variety of circumstances. And they're often required by insurers as well in advance of you making an insurance claim. So risk assessments and risk assessment records should become a part of your touring management practice. There are 5 stages, essentially, to putting together a risk assessment: identifying the potential hazards, establishing who might be at risk, who might be harmed and how, assessing the risks, deciding whether an existing precaution or procedures are adequate enough or whether more steps are required, a requirement to record your findings, and finally, the ability to regularly review your assessment and revise the risk assessment if necessary. So this is quite a detailed area. So what I'm going to do here is drop another couple of documents into the chat so you can take a look at these at your own leisure in more detail. But I do urge you to look at it. This is becoming a really important part of touring practice, whether at home or abroad. So just give me a sec while I drop in these. There is a risk assessment template I've just dropped in. And apologies, people, these are all in English, but I'm sure someone very kindly in Quantica or in the British Council can translate it into Spanish as well for you. And I'm going to drop in an example as well, a completed example. And that's gone in as a PDF. So I'm going to finish this section on presenting and touring dance by talking about sustainable and green touring. Many of you, I know, are deeply committed to preserving the environment. There are lots of ways to reduce your carbon footprint when traveling. Beyond just considering which mode of transport you use, and you might like to consider measures that, for example, try to use environmentally friendly materials for your sets, props, and costumes. You may like to consider liaising with your local partners or promoters to see if there are more sustainable ways of arranging your set and props than transporting them from your home base to their location. So, for example, you might be able to hire or source or remake some of those elements locally, and that might also be cheaper as well as greener. And this is particularly, of course, relevant to international touring. You might like to consider how your performers will be traveling to not just venues and locations, but to your rehearsal space. And indeed, how green is your rehearsal space? Obviously, try to consider energy use in your whole production, but particularly in your lighting plan, and explore technologies that will reduce the power demand. And when abroad, look to stay close to the venue so you can rely on walking or public transport to get you to the venue. Why not consider requesting from the promoter that you stay in a hostel or a hotel that is environmentally certified? Here's a good one. Try to only eat local food rather than imported food. And finally, avoid printed publicity material where you can do. So much is done online now. So much is available over the internet. Think about avoiding printed materials if at all possible. Now, there are lots of links, lots of organizations looking at this area of sustainability. And rather than going into detail, I'm going to drop into the chat room now just a little document with a few green links. And again, these are mostly to English-speaking organizations, but some of them are really fantastic and have been terribly helpful to me in my practice. So I'll drop these in as well for you. 1 second, please. And that's called Green Links and Resources. Okay, going to move on to this last section before we take a break. And it's called Outreach and Education. This is a particular area of interest to myself, I think to Michael as well. And there's a broader framework around this, which we in Ireland value greatly, which is in terms of promoting inclusion and reconciliation in what is a post-conflict society. So this outreach and education section, I think, continues to speak to me in my own practice. Dance, like all the art forms, plays a significant role in the education and well-being of children and young people, and as such is a valuable tool for your work in engaging communities. This is something I know you already know, of course you do. But because this principle is widely accepted by governments, national and international trusts and foundations, it can also allow you to develop new partnerships and access new funding. I'm just going to highlight here some advantages of designing and delivering such outreach programs. Maybe
algunas ventajas.
Sorry, there's a little interruption there. Are you happy?
Una pequeña interrupción.
We're having, I think, a technical issue because the English translation is getting in the way of all of the speaker's voice. So I don't know if Alexandra, can you help us with that? Alexandra, ¿nos puedes ayudar, por favor? Richard, can you give it a try, please?
Yep. So I'm going to just resume talking about some of the advantages of designing and delivering outreach programs that are linked to your performance program. And I may just, if I have time, touch on one example. So the first, I think, advantage is tackling disadvantage and underachievement. The arts generally
Resolver problemas de desventaja.
Opportunity to improve future learning with all children standing to benefit, but with the impact on children from disadvantaged families and communities potentially being transformative. Partnerships between community, educational, and government institutions with culture, arts, and heritage can be specifically targeted to areas and groups with a history of disadvantage and deprivation. These approaches harness the sector's innovative and inspirational features and capabilities, and the learning continuation and progression opportunities they provide beyond the classroom and into family and community-based settings. So the point I'm making here is that arts work, and including very much dance, is particularly advantageous in tackling disadvantage and underachievement, and will be valued by the communities that you tour to, the communities that you work with. But it's also very good in supporting emotional health and well-being. So approaches around education and outreach also support measures to improve well-being and indeed resilience. Effective mental health services around the globe are responding to the needs of their people by increasingly integrating community-based organizations and innovative approaches in their work. There is a very nice phrase from a recent mental health report here in Northern Ireland, which sums up the value of employing the creative arts in health and well-being as express myself, explain to myself, and teach myself. I'm sure Laura from Dance Space has covered this in more detail in an earlier masterclass, so I'm going to move on. The third point, the third advantage to outreach and education is about promoting inclusion and community cohesion. For many societies, including Colombia and Northern Ireland, this remains a crucial issue to address. The United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child sets out the civil, political, economic, social, and cultural rights of every child. Article 2931 requires provision of education which enables children to take part in cultural and artistic activities and to enjoy their own culture and to respect the cultures of others. The UNCRC and other international charters and frameworks enshrine cultural rights and activities in education. And this further demonstrates the role of the culture, arts, and heritage sectors, including dance, as a key component of an education which protects these rights. We as I'm going to say artistic and activists in this area should not be shy about referring to the United Nations Convention and the cultural rights that should be enjoyed by people around the world. And that's why I've touched on that subject. I think it's very important indeed. This approach of promoting inclusion and community cohesion also helps with navigating legacies of conflict and division, and with promoting equality and inclusion of minority ethnic communities. Groups, sites, and practitioners across the culture, arts, and heritage sectors support young people with intercultural experiences and in exploring the past and the social, economic, cultural, and political influences and complexities which shape who we are today. They provide creative and inspirational learning opportunities which help to communicate historical facts and their implications, and an understanding that different perceptions and interpretations exist and can be valid. Okay, I'm going to just finish this section by saying that obviously outreach and education has another advantage in that it can be an attractive supplement to touring performances. It can bring added value when you talk to a programmer or a promoter. It goes beyond the performance and allows you to build an engagement program with young people or with other parts of the community. We haven't talked about, for example, older people in this, but with other communities as well as part of the offer that you make to programmers. So it can be part of that offer that you make when you put together a touring proposal and you send that out to promoters. I talked about between tiny cities earlier on. This is an example I just wanted to briefly touch on in terms of good practice in outreach and education. So Between Tiny Cities is a production from Australia by the great Australian choreographer Nick Power. It was at the centre of our 2022 edition and our education programme, and it comprised a short residency with the choreographer Nick Power and his dancers, and it featured not just performances but also workshops and master classes, and it was around their acclaimed work Between Tiny Cities, which is a rich exploration of masculinity and multiculturalism through the lens of hip-hop choreography. And the workshops that they put together examined the following topics: rituals, hip-hop culture, the art of b-boying, breakdance, different movement styles and language. And they were created around central themes such as cross-cultural communications, identity, cultural locality, and masculinity. So they were using different aesthetics and to address also different themes reflected in this work. There's more of that online between tiny cities, and I can certainly send Lena some links if that's of interest to you all. Right. It's now, for myself and Michael, 13 minutes after midnight. So, and you've been very patiently listening to me for the last hour. So I'm going to suggest, Lena, that we take a 5-minute break